Jack Parrott, aviation electricians mate, second class. Road to Spain was always the longest. It was a month. In Brazil, we were in Recife, Brazil. We were actually supposed to go down to Rio, but our squadron ended up staying in Recife, and we were running operations with the Brazilian military. Brazil was an interesting place. I was down there at the time frame of, I'd say, late 80s. Before we went on the deployment, the flight surgeon told everybody that just assume everybody has something in Brazil, either hepatitis A or B, or HIV positive or something. Oh, don't drink the water, don't eat the salads, all these things you couldn't do because of E. coli and all of the stuff that they didn't have in Brazil that we have here. And of course, the first night we seen the flight surgeon at the restaurant eating salad, like he told us not to do. But it was definitely an interesting, first time I'd ever been to a country that I would consider like a third world country at that time. And just to see the difference between, it was the haves, and then everybody else was the have-nots. There was no middle class. It was either poor or rich. It was just interesting seeing that. You could go to a mall, and then down the street a ways, it's just slums. And the other trips were, generally a week. We only actually spent one night in Scotland, and then we flew down to England. But the one night in Scotland was great. We went to a Scottish pub, and the Scots were just the nicest people. They all wanted to talk to you. They all wanted to buy you drinks. They were just wonderful people all around, and we actually flew out of Scotland on one of the worst flights that I'd ever had in the North Atlantic. A couple hundred feet off of the water in the middle of a storm, where your stomach is always up in your throat. That was probably one of the only flights that I ever thought I was going to get sick on, and I was really, really bad. But we actually left there, and we ended up in England, and I'm trying to remember the town in England that we were at. I do remember the hot tuna surfing classic was there, because it actually just left before we got there. Nquay. I pronounce it Nquay, but the people in Scotland called it Nookie. And so they would always say, "Oh, you're going to Nookie." So England was a nice town, but it was unfortunately it was a military town. There was I think a Marine base there, so either the people loved you or they hated you. Just because that's generally how it is when there's a U.S. base in a facility in a different country. Either they love you there or they hate you there. If you can get out away from the military base in the countryside, generally people are great. I spent time in Jacksonville, Florida, doing flying drug operations for the Coast Guard, looking for boats filled with drugs on the water. They was trying to sneak into the country. That was a fun trip down to Jacksonville. I was considered a ground pounder, which meant that I stayed back as the plane went out to fly, and when it would come back, we would fix it. So as they're out flying, we're usually hanging out at the beach. I actually got a meritorious Coast Guard ribbon, even though I was in the Navy, because we were doing flight ops with the Coast Guard. I got a Coast Guard ribbon.